Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series, Navigating Change in Construction. This is part 2, 2025 Trends. I'm Dominga Gundilak, and I'm a part of the Kahua marketing team. Before we get started with today's webinar, I am going to go over a couple housekeeping items. If you have any questions you want to ask throughout the webinar, you can go ahead and drop them in the Q&A box, which I'm highlighting right now, so you should see that pop up on your screen. We will be leaving time at the end to go over all the questions. And then I also wanted to point out the related content section. Here you'll find links to additional pieces of content. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator and host for today's webinar, AJ Waters.
Thank you, Dominga, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're at. We're excited for you to join us today for part 2. Navigating Change in Construction, the 2025 Trends version. Yesterday, we looked back at 2024, so if you missed that and want to take a look at the recording, feel free to do so. Today, we're going to look forward and see what might be on the radar for this year. As we jump into that, though, the first thing I want to do is introduce our panelists, because that's where we're going to get our wisdom, or at least a peek at what they are seeing as trends and how they're seeing those trends affect things like technology and construction. So we will begin with Michelle. If you would introduce yourself and in your introduction say who you are, who you're with, and what's one exciting thing that has happened for you so far in January of this year.
Hi, everyone. Michelle Glazier with Burn Software. Just to give a little background, I have been in the construction industry for roughly 20 years. Started out working for a large general contractor in the St. Louis area. I've been with Burn Software for, this will be my 14th year. And Burn Software has been a partner with Kahua for the last 7 years. And so my specialty is doing software implementations and doing data integrations and migrations. And we also do other things like report writing and custom apps. What I'm most looking forward to is, I'm looking forward to seeing, some of the things we're going to talk about today, like the AI technology and VR. Thanks, AJ.
You're welcome. A couple of sneak peeks. I appreciate that. All right, Michael, how about you? Introduce yourself, who you're with, and what you're excited about for this year.
All right, I'm Michael Marcel. I'm with K2. Been in the business for about 25 years, supporting all types of different customers, all the way from construction, manufacturing, deployment, software engineering, research and development, logistics, projects from 100,000 all the way up to 25 billion for any type of industry, for sub-trades all the way up through owners and government. For me, excited about seeing what we're going to see coming up. And there's so many different aspects. We've got all types of changes in our on the federal level. We have all types of changes on the commercial level, and seeing how everything is going to come together. And right now, as the industry has seen, the technology phase is, I think there's going to be a massive push for technology this year, and I'm excited to be a part of that. Over.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and thank you, Michael. The push for technology has really accelerated lately, and as we'll get into some of the topics today, there's good reasons why. So as we mentioned, we're going to dive into trends that we're facing here in 2025. But sometimes with exciting new trends comes new regulation. So part of what we'll also talk about, like when we get to a new trend, we might talk about how we expect or maybe anticipate regulation changing because of that trend. And we've already hinted at the fact that we're going to talk about AI. Something tells me at some point that'll get regulated in some way, as an example. So, but before we do that, we're going to jump in with a poll related to our first question. Our first question is about regulations that have been in place and companies that have moved forward with what they call net zero carbon initiatives. So many companies have 2025, no, they were 2030. Many companies have 2030 goals for net zero carbon. And a lot of utilities are facing those as well. So the question here is, are you a company that's like that? Or have you heard of those net zero goals? Because that's going to be where we start. There's something that is becoming increasingly important. So how do we track that? How do we make sure that we're meeting those initiatives? So we'll give people a few seconds here yet to answer. And then let's take a quick look at those results. Looks like we have a handful of responses. Maybe. There we go. All right, so a little bit of a split there, 60% yes, 30% no. I would imagine kind of, looking through the list of folks that might be here, some of those yeses are from either major utilities or schools or other owners like that. And some of those no's might be from companies that aren't necessarily owners, but contractors or the like. It'll be interesting. We'll see kind of where this chat goes. So Michelle, we'll start with you. Over the past few years, we've kind of seen this focus on sustainability and these net zero initiatives become popular. Is tracking goals like this something that companies need to be aware of when they start looking at project management platforms? Like, is this something that the platforms can help them do now, or are we still kind of playing catch up with that kind of mentality?
Yeah, thanks, AJ. I do. The construction sector, it's currently a major source of global carbon emissions. I was reading that construction contributes to 39% of emissions globally. So I think, using a project management platform like Kahua would be a great asset in helping manage those carbon reduction initiatives. Some emerging trends. There's definitely a shift towards more integrated and technology-driven approaches. And this includes, integrating with things like Internet of Things, using smart monitoring systems, implementing real-time carbon monitoring platforms. And, some of the benefits of using a project management platform for these things is, you have enhanced stakeholder awareness. You're going to get real-time reporting. You'll have those carbon emission assessments, carbon emissions monitoring. So I think project management platforms is going to have a huge impact and be very beneficial to reducing carbon emissions.
Thanks, Michelle. And what's interesting is a lot of times things like renewable energy, sustainable, carbon net zero, they tend to fluctuate based on that as a priority, based on kind of where we're at as a country. This week, as a country, we kind of made a major shift. Michael, you've been around the federal space for a long time. Do you see these regulations on net zero fluctuating with this shift, or do you think they'll stay the focus that they are, regardless of kind of what happens in Washington?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a fundamental aspect of understanding what it looks like going forward. But when you look at it, there's actually two parts to this. There's the regulation side, and most things in the industry start because of a regulation. But once they start to build upon themselves, they get almost like a perpetual motion thing, right? So companies that have invested in it are going to continue forward. So do I think the next 4 years are going to be focused on this? No, definitely not. The oil companies are already tracking back from focusing on renewable energy, the monies in the fossil fuels. But if you look at the organizations that are building and that are growing, that are commercial, like Amazon, Walmart, Apple, Target, those are all the top tier organizations that are focused on renewable energies. And there's always the lead standards. Those have been around many years prior to any kind of change in many of the requirements. So I feel like those things are still going to move forward. Now, net zero, I think is going to go up and down over the next several years in terms of the importance of it. But I do believe the commercial organizations are going to continue to focus on it. Now, we use, program management information systems, not just for tracking the carbon, but also when you're dealing with multiple different funds management, where is money coming from and how are you controlling that, and how they want to fund it from internal sources and external sources. You want to definitely make sure you're tracking that. You want to understand when you're tracking maintenance and service life cycle. There's so much more to the application than just the carbon emission requirement itself. So these systems become a much bigger aspect of it. And if you look at the new EMAPS lab that's being built out in Golden, Colorado, Department of Energy is definitely putting money into renewables, and they're looking at what the future state is of the non-carbon based energy. So I do think even as typical when you change the guards in our political system, it takes years for things to really catch on. And so I do think the impact is not going to be immediate, and I think there's enough commercial interest that I think will still continue to move forward. But more importantly, internationally, it's a huge aspect, right? So when you go look at all the conferences of any of the major solutions out there, program management information systems that manage to capture the net zero model, most of the people that are interested are Europe, Middle East. That's where we're seeing most of that work, and they're calculating all the way down to, is it an asphalt road or a concrete road because of the what the emissions rate is of that. Right. It's very intense, and actually you'll probably hear a theme throughout most of this is, from my perspective, I feel like just the United States is always chartered to be number one. But when you look at us in the terms of technology, we struggle compared to a lot of the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's a fair point, that we're sometimes playing catch up, especially when it comes to technology tracking construction processes. I mean, we've kind of always trailed. We'll get into digital twin later, but that's another place where we tend to be behind compared to the global industry. And then I love the point that you make about how environmentally conscious companies are going to stay environmentally conscious. Like, it just because they see a change doesn't mean that they're not going to continue with that goodwill. And so that's an excellent point. Michelle, you made a point about Internet of Things and integrating sensors and bringing data in to the system that could help support some of this stuff. So our next poll question actually goes in that direction. Our next poll question is, when it comes to your project management platform or your project management solution, how many external systems are you integrating data in? And by that, I mean like automated data, not manually moving it with an import-export. How many have active APIs that transition data. And we use some ranges because it's just a ballpark, right? Depending on how much you know about your system, and it could be anywhere from none to 10 plus. We're kind of trying to gauge across the attendee list how many people see a lot of systems and how many people see a few systems integrating into their project management. So we're starting to get a couple of responses. We'll wait for a few more. While we get those, Michelle, what's the most you've ever integrated into a project management system?
What's the most I've ever integrated?
The most external sources you've ever integrated in, like 5, like 10.
The number of sources? Sorry,
Yep. Yeah, the number of other applications that you had APIs connected into the PMIS.
I mean, typically, in my experience, we haven't had a client with like a heavy number of external sources.
That's good.
Generally, we're integrating in, 1 or 2 different programs, and with Kahua, always cost. Everyone's always integrating with a cost platform.
Yeah, with financials. We'll run those results real quick and let's see how many. Oh, 1 to 3 is the clear winner. There are a couple of 10 pluses though, so that tells you there are a few out there with a big lift when it comes to the integrations. Michael, you've worked with clients integrating external data. You had a great presentation about a couple of ways to do that at our Enabling Innovation conference not too long ago. What do you see as some of the benefits? What are some of the things that people are looking for when it comes to Internet of Things? Like, what can we do now that maybe we couldn't a year ago?
Well, technology continues to advance. Internet of Things, by definition, is really like Alexa and Google, right? How many times have you asked Alexa to put the timer on and your TV responds, right? So, fundamentally, we're seeing the data interface, and we mentioned earlier in the question there. Where I started to really see Internet of Things taking off was in the security realm, where we used to create interface pieces amongst about 15 to 20 different pieces of technology into a single place. And then as you started to see the value of all of that interfaces, if you're getting a camera and an IR, a LiDAR, and IPMs and all these different sensors all tied together into a single point. And if they see anything, they can trigger a gate to close, or they can, trigger a big piece of steel to come out of the ground. And that's all allowing the technology to see and then react. And so what's happening is you're starting to see people wonder, with all this intelligence we have of data in our environments, is if we can give our information the same, and the central environment, all that other additional information. For instance, in the aviation market space, we've tied schedules into 4D models, right? And now you take the 4D model and you put in sensor systems. Well, if you're running cameras, then I can take status off of the cameras. And now I can start to take performance, and I can also start to see risk. I can start to see claims, right, where there's delays and disruptions. By all of these information pieces coming together, we're starting to really ask the question of, well, how many times do you need that physical interface, right? We talked a little earlier about the fact of right now, people think of a construction management system or a program management system sitting here, and you bring in accounting data and you bring in purchasing data. Well, if you start bringing in other data like photos, like sensor systems out in your around your site, maintenance information, now you can start to centralize information and ask it questions, which we'll get to here shortly. We're doing a tremendous amount of centralized data, clean the data, and now just start asking it questions. And that gives you a lot more intelligence moving into what other more efficient ways to run work, what are the major risks that are coming up. But it's really the Internet of Things capability of tying different things together and automating that allows us to then move into the next big aspect, which is what we talked about earlier, how excited we are to get AI and ML and everything from that perspective going.
Yeah, that's another good point, because AI and ML, machine learning, needs something to learn. And if the data's not ready, there's nothing to learn. Michelle, what about looking backward, right? So like, it's easy for me to put Internet of Things sensors into new facilities, but I've obviously got facilities that I've had around for, 10, 20, 50 years, depending on what kind of owner I am. And so when you've gone out and implemented, a new technology, and they talk about planning for facilities maintenance, is Internet of Things something that the CapEx teams should be considering in how they upgrade past facilities?
I do, absolutely. I mean, everything these days is driven around technology, and that's just going to continue to increase. And I mean, technology is widely used in the construction industry and in these facilities. And I think it's important that they go in and, consider that and outfit these older buildings using IoT technology. Especially, in construction, during that construction phase, because there's a surge of innovation and efficiency driven by IoT technology today. Construction projects, they require a very high level of complexity. You have a number of different activities going on and being carried out. And so there's a huge need for this type of technology to be deployed. Some examples of where this helps with, on the construction side, is helping track trends, monitoring quality. So this is could be a construction in a hospital, right? So you want to monitor that air quality, or even monitoring the quality of, say, cement being poured on site. Another area is like worker safety. So just outfitting your vehicles or wearable devices, or even looking at hazard avoidance. And then just the facility itself, looking at like HVAC systems, being able to monitor the systems and the ventilation. I was just reading that, at least on the construction side, IoT was valued at about $11.2 billion in 2022, and that is expected to surge to $44.2 billion by 2031. So there's definitely a huge market out there that's definitely taking off. So I do think this needs to be accounted for.
One of the things that you said there is, you mentioned the inspections and air quality in hospitals. Like, those are incredibly high standards. The concrete pressure testing, that's a really easy place to implement something like IoT in a process that was very manual, right? In things like monitoring the air quality and the filters as you install a hospital, strict standards, a lot of work. It took a lot of manual effort. Now you can put in those sensors and have alerts triggering for you. That's a great addition to, or augmentation of, what used to take a lot of time, and now it's just collecting on its own. So kind of in the same realm of IoT, but looking at the facility before instead of during construction. One of the things that that has always been a big topic in design, and it's been around for 15, almost 20 years now, is clash detection. However, we're getting closer and closer to living in the 3D world without being in the 3D world. VR, AR, augmented reality, virtual reality, those things are becoming more mainstream. So, Michelle, you know, we've done clash detection for a long time. Are we to the point where the models are good enough we can do that in VR or AR?
Yeah. So first, let me just kind of explain what clash detection is, in case anyone doesn't know. So clash detection is, you know, the conflict between different elements on a building. So with clash detection, we are looking to see if did we build a concrete beam and then also have, you know, pipe or wire supposed to be going to that same location. So it's, you know, identifying any of those types of conflicts in the design of the project. When we look at virtual reality, you know, virtual reality has been very slow in general, taking off. I mean, this technology has been around for decades, and only recently has it become, you know, more attractive to both users and on the corporate side. You know, there's been some barriers in place. I mean, for one, just the high VR hardware and software requirements that come along with that. Also, you know, affordability. Until recently, it was pretty expensive to own a VR headset or to have that type of technology. Also, accessibility. You know, it's, you know, recently, you know, now we have like the Meta Oculus headset, and then Apple just came out with their VR headset. So it hasn't been until recently where it's been more affordable and easier to get access. But I do, as far as on the construction side, I do think there are, you know, many benefits to adopting VR in construction, especially with clash detection. I mean, when you combine, you know, the VR technology with machine learning and like a VR driven BIM, I think that you're really going to have a powerful tool on the VR side. And I think that being able to find and identify those things early on is just going to be invaluable for the projects. And when we talk about VR and augmented reality, so like the VR technology is completely immersive. So it's, you put on a VR headset and you're completely immersed in whatever you're looking at, versus the augmented reality, which is, you know, that newer like pass-through technology that we're seeing, where you see the world as it is. It's just augmented, and that's where I think we're going to see some of this clash detection come into play. And just the idea is really cool to me of just being able to use this augmented reality to walk a job site, for example, and be able to see some of the stuff that you wouldn't be able to see before. I also think, though, that VR is going to be very helpful in other ways in construction. I mean, just looking at training, right? Being able to use virtual reality to train on using a heavy piece of equipment, or learning a new machine, or even doing something as simple as like safety training.
That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about bringing training into the conversation. I'd mostly been just thinking about the models themselves, and then you also reference AI. It's interesting. Michael, have you seen customers increase their interest in AR, VR, or are they still looking at it as kind of Hollywood BIM at this point?
So, many different points were brought up here, and the simple answer is United States still looks at it as a marketing product, really. Overseas, it's a lot more utilization. When we started getting into building information modeling back in 2009, and I started training it as a function in 2011, all of the support services in smart cities and establishing virtual reality in the construction business, like Hexagon. Hexagon's a really large construction supplier. They've had materials, as Michelle said, for decades out there, right? Doing cornerstone, marking to do identification of building risks. We use a lot of the 3D modeling and 4D modeling in order to capture, changes in the project and capture change orders before they happen. But when you look at the United States and compare it, it's unfortunate that we're a little behind on that curve. But fundamentally, the main aspect you're trying to build off of is making sure that the data is real, right? So when you start going to trades, they're using 4D and 3D modeling very, very well, right? So they're doing their spooling, all their manufacturing productivity is all built out of 4D modeling and 3D modeling. That data is kept to that level, and then it's moved at a much higher level to the general contractor. So if you're working at the general contractor's level, trying to do VR out there without having all the detailed drawings down to the shop drawing level, it gets very difficult, right? And also the way the AIA standards are for designs, where you can have single model objects that go, like a wall that goes up 10 floors. So it requires some investment to build out and break down these products so that they can be used more effectively. What it comes down to, and we said it earlier when we started talking about the renewable energies part, the government does the regulation, and that's what kicks it all off, right? So the Ministry of Defense in the UK mandates virtual design and construction. Well, now once that's moving, now people will start getting interested in VR. They'll start looking at other things, right? So if you rely on construction companies to take that initiative, it's not going to really happen that well, right? I'm not saying it won't, right? I know there's virtual design groups in construction companies, but fundamentally the investment is more of a cost as opposed to, a profit center. It's really trying to figure out what it could do. And as Michelle mentioned, you can do it for training, you can do it for the biggest part we're seeing is change reduction, where you could do walkthroughs on a site with a VR and do your design in real time, even though the building's not there. And you can see true clash detection right there. Well, wait a minute now, the drawing doesn't show the hole in the wall from the CMU where the mechanical piping is coming through, right? Instead of waiting for us to have the wall up and then go, hey, by the way, I have a pipe that needs to go through. Those type of way ahead of time changes are substantial cost savings, major schedule improvements. Also to be able to do, side by side type digital twin comparison, where you can see if I did a resequencing of work, what would that look like, right? But I think fundamentally, and as I said earlier, the government takes that first responsibility. I don't know if everybody knows, but the GSA, the Government Services Agency, they have General Services Agency. I'm sorry. They actually have had a building information modeling group since 2003, right? But no one has ever put a regulation in place. And but that group's been there forever. They've got a whole entire manual for how do you do 3 and 4D modeling. So until that initial start, and typically, way back when scheduling became a requirement for the federal government, then everyone started looking at it. Now you can't find anyone without a schedule in construction, right? We need that same catapult to happen here for VDC and the VR and augmented reality systems to really kick off, because the investment won't be done by by the private companies. Everything seems to be working well, and they're making margins. Putting that investment into it is a cost, right? So,
right.
I'm not saying they're not doing it. It's just not to the level of what would need to happen to take it to the next level.
So we talked about training, and we talked about kind of walking the job before the job's there. Quick side question for you, Michael. Do you see the VR headset becoming a way for owners to walk the job while it's under construction when they don't live there? Right? We talked about some of the big players like Google, Apple, Amazon. They're building everywhere. Like, could someone sitting in an office in, Silicon Valley walk a project in the Middle East thanks to VR once we get this all set up?
So the simple answer is yes. It's already being done that way, and the way it's being done that way is actually going back to the Internet of Things, right? So you put your sensor systems around a site with all of your different sensor technology. Then you can sit with your VR in your living room and walk the site per se. Now you got to be careful; you don't want to walk too far, but you can kind of move through the site, right? But fundamentally, that technology exists. Really, what it comes down to is, does the owner want to make the requirement for the drawings to be strong enough for them to do that, right? The sensor systems to be there on site to do that. But if you're building a capital improvement program of a power system or an infrastructure building or a facility, and your board is sitting in another state or another country, you get a tremendous amount of benefit being able to understand the performance of your project from being anywhere, right? Plus, you could really start capturing, as we talked about earlier, changes, delays, disruptions, site conditions, anything like that can all be captured with those same sensors. And you could start, then you could start taking all that data and building it into bigger models, right? I want to do asking questions, moving from there. So, it's absolutely capable right now.
That's awesome, and you save on travel. So, asking it questions. Let's transition to the topic of all topics in 2024, which was AI. And to do that, we actually have one more poll. So we'll start with a quick poll question. And this is just kind of for you all to think about on your own here. Are you experimenting with AI? And we have a couple of different answers. Yes, both at home and at work. Or maybe you're just playing with it by yourself because it hasn't kind of made its way to work yet. Or the easy answer of no. It's funny because I kind of think of AI right now as today's BYOD, like bring your own device. So if you remember when the iPhone launched and companies would only let you use BlackBerry still because of security, people started saying, "I'll just use my own phone." And right now, AI is something that's been highly commercialized in the private sector, where we are at home. Like, we can use it on, half our phones just come equipped with it now, and we can use it however we want. But at work, we're not exactly sure what we're going to do because there's privacy restrictions, there's regulations that haven't been met yet. So people could be opening themselves up to some risk using public AI models with company information, kind of like we were in BYOD way back when. And so if your company doesn't have an AI strategy yet, might be something to consider. But we'll pull those results up real quick and see where folks are at. About 40% are using it at work and at home, and half are using it personally. One person is a no, not using it at all. So that's interesting. Michelle, AI and machine learning, they've been super buzzy. is the capital projects industry, and in particular, our data, like what we're using to store our data, is it ready to leverage AI?
I think so, like you were stating, AJ, I mean, AI is all the rage right now. And it is becoming integrated in, many apps and devices that we're using every day. I do think, though, however, on the construction industry, I think currently today, I don't think all the data is there yet. I think using it in a smaller sense, maybe yes. But when we get into things like machine learning, where you need, a lot of data there to make your calculations and your predictions, I don't think we're there yet. I think we'll get there. It's just AI is, a newer technology. I do think, however, when we look at AI and project management systems, I do think, yes, I mean, there's a huge benefit there. And when we start looking at things like, risk detection, I think eventually we'll see and have the ability to do things like in Kahua, like, help building apps. When it also looking at things like being able to do data extractions, and even, helping write and edit records within a platform like Kahua. So, being boots on the ground out in the field, being able to have AI help write those RFIs or write those punch list records for you.
Do you think we're going to see AI regulations becoming a factor in how industries approach this trend? Do you think we'll see some sort of regulating body coming over and or trying to help with privacy in this sense?
Yeah, with AI being newer, we really have not seen a lot of federal regulation in the United States. The framework has been set, and a lot of what we're seeing is more of like at the state and the local level. It'll be interesting to see, going into 2025, if we're going to see, a major overhaul on regulations or what the current administration decides to do in regards to AI. I know there's some AI regulations that came into play last year that will go into effect this year. Again, it's mostly at the state and local level. And those things are more, we're looking at like data privacy rights, disclaimers about AI generated data, identifying when you're using AI, and then also just kind of setting what those penalties or legal action is going to look like. I know what I've been reading is there's in the EU, I know they're further ahead of us when it comes to legislation, and there's a landmark AI Act that is set to come out that a lot of people have their eyes on to see if that kind of sets some standard on regulations in AI. I do think, construction companies are going to need to address like how to navigate AI and how to navigate this legal landscape. Looking at things like the ethical and legal use of AI technologies, for example.
Yeah, ethical becomes a real interesting question all of a sudden, because basically AI became a really quick search that gives you responses that could sound like your own, right? And I mean, even schools are battling the ethics of AI and everything that it does. Michael, kind of going back to, you have a lot of experience with federal work, and federal regulations are at a completely different level when it comes to security and privacy and things of that nature. One of such regulations went active in December, CMMC, which is one of the strictest cybersecurity policies for DoD type work. Do you see federal regulations kind of hampering companies' opportunities to leverage AI because they're doing more federal work?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, just teeing off quickly is that K2's been we're a 35-year-old project controls business, and this last about 3 or 4 years, we've put a heavy emphasis on AI and machine learning, and building out that capability to the point that it's actually a function within our organization, bringing in people that have been around it for 20 plus years. And the whole cybersecurity maturity model, that certification is a foundation to control non-sensitive materials. And so what we're seeing now is we're using AI as a monitoring aid, right? So the AI is actually supporting us in threat detection. And so that builds machine learning to support threat detection. So what I think is going to happen is CMMC is going to start bolstering AI and ML. You're going to start seeing companies use that data in order to effectively capture and control threats that are coming in. So we're seeing that. We're using it today for that purpose, for the data controls, for intelligence, and you can ask your questions left and right. And so CMMC is a compliance requirement for your threat, and you can use AI to capture and see that threat.
That's a good spin. CMMC is going to help us. Like I like that as because most people look at it, right, and they're like, oh man, this is another certification I got to get. It takes a lot of work. It's expensive, but really in the long run, it's helping us. And a lot of times up front, it doesn't feel like that. And so that's a good positive spin to put on it. All right, so doing just a quick time check, we have time for one more kind of little topic, and it stems around like the culmination of all of this, the Internet of Things, the clash detection, project management softwares integrating with other systems, and even AI to an extent. We, for the longest time, have loved to talk about the concept of a digital twin. And we hinted at it a little bit that maybe other parts of the world are better at this than the United States is currently. With the consolidation of data, with the Internet of Things, with maybe models getting a little bit more mature, Michelle, do you think we're finally at a place with a connected platform that companies can take advantage of the promise of digital twin?
I do. But first, just want to quickly just give a brief explanation of what a digital twin is. So a digital twin is a virtual representation of an object. So it's taking a physical object and creating its digital twin. So it's essentially like outfitting that physical object with sensors and other things to monitor that physical device to create that digital twin. So a good example would be, taking a piece of HVAC equipment and outfitting it with those various sensors, and then collecting all of that information and creating that digital twin. So tracking things such as performance and energy output, temperature, things like that. And yes, I think, the digital twin technology, I think, is a huge benefit in the construction industry and for project management. And I do think, with how technology is kind of taken off, like Internet of Things has taken off since 2019, we do see a lot more of this digital twin. Some benefits to this is project managers now can better monitor trends of progress. They're able to do better predictions of problems. They can collect large amount of data in real time. It helps them, anticipate risk. And I do see there's a huge opportunity there to kind of integrate some of this with a project management system such as Kahua, because now you're able to automate real-time updates and giving project managers, instant project progress. You also are able to record, performance indicators. And another huge aspect of this is not just during construction. I mean, I think this carries over into, closeout and post-construction when you get more into asset management. After completion of the project, you're able to create these digital twins and monitor things like your systems, HVAC, lighting, energy. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's. I think you make an excellent point there at the end that it becomes something that the operations team can use. And Michael, again, you've kind of been in other parts of the world. You've seen this succeeding. So, we talked about a lot of different things today, whether it be energy performance, asking questions via AI, or maybe even getting to the point where we can predict failure on assets. Are we seeing digital twin strategies moving toward those sorts of things and maybe even succeeding in certain places?
Yeah, if you take all the things we've talked about here, you take the Internet of Things, you bring all this intelligence together, you bring it to a centralized location where you can start really asking it questions and AI modeling. And then you now have a consolidated history and a reference point to really start taking into what digital twins are for what we use it for. So digital twins for me is it's almost like in a scheduling world, a baseline and a forecast. And you can really manipulate the forecast any way you want as you're kind of running through that project, right? So what we're seeing is you could take in the design phase, you could take all that intelligence, all that information that you have captured from all the other projects, and you can create all kinds of alternative models, right? And you can create all types of different forecasting. You can do resequencing. You can do now when you talk about digital twins, in terms of energy utilization, those type of things, that's a very specific capability. I'm looking at more of the model of a facility, and you want to start really asking it questions and challenging different ways to do things, even where you stage materials. Right, so we did staging plans in the digital twin of a facility, and then we ran it through the cycle to see whether or not that staged area became a problem and when it would become a problem. Right, so but that's all, and that all allows to all that works when you start bringing all that data together. Right, and what we're seeing today, even when you look at if anybody has kids and they're watching them build things in roadblocks and, all the other, products that they have now out there, it's going to happen, right? You talked about virtual reality earlier. sometimes my kids disappear for hours down there in virtual reality world, right? So, it's going to be, we can wait for it, or and see them take over and run with it, or we try to enhance it now and really build upon it. But to your point, when you go overseas, it's a heavy used product. You see a lot more utilization now, not anywhere near what it could be, but it's definitely way more utilized overseas than it is in our neck of the woods. And unfortunately, I feel like the West Coast of the United States is even further ahead than the East Coast, right? So, I think there's even dynamics from that perspective. So, it's the big data capabilities. And the other thing that we noticed is that we didn't have the capacity before. Now we do, right? So these computers are getting bigger and bigger. Their storage capacity is getting stronger. The speed in which they can analyze things are getting faster, and that's moving at a pace that's just unimaginable. Well, the more speed and power and source of data you can pull from, the more you can start messing with. So we start seeing what we can do in digital twins. We're doing claims avoidance and analysis in a forecasted model of a BIM. You can start getting into asking it questions. What else could I do? How else could I do this faster? What else could be more effective? What if I put a crane over here? And you can just start asking it, and it will draw all those capabilities for you. So that's where I see that. You see what smart cities does in terms of bringing all that intelligence together and building out traffic flow models and police utilization models, emergency route options. If you have a catastrophic emergency, what you can do from that perspective in terms of getting in there and saving people's lives. These models are becoming really expansive, and we now have the capacity to start doing that. So, it's stronger, overseas from us, but I think we have the capacity to get there.
Yeah, and that's maybe a really positive spin to leave things on today, is that we have the capacity to get there. We now have the capabilities. So everything that we've been talking about, been dreaming of, been hoping for the last few years, 2025 is the year that we have the capability to do those sorts of things. So, well, we want to be very cognizant of everyone's time. We're coming right up on the edge, and we appreciate you all for joining us today. Thank you both, Michael and Michelle, for your insights. I know I learned a lot, and I appreciate your time. We do have some questions in the chat, so we're going to send those out to the panelists, get some feedback, and get those out to those who asked them, so that we can run through those and have answers for everyone. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Dominga, and we'll close things out. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, AJ. I just wanted to go ahead and say thank you to our audience for joining us today, and our speakers for also being a part of this. We will be sending out the recording in the next couple of days, so be on the lookout for that, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you very much.